Hey guys, this is Michael, and we're here to do another quick Fusion tutorial, as quick as we can at least. This time what we're going to be doing, we're going to be reviewing a little bit of our green screen tutorials, but we're also going to be adding in, taking various sources and putting them in with our green screen clips. Usually you'd see this in a corporate video where you have graphics or text you want to add. We're going to do graphics today. And we're also going to be using the transform tool, and we're going to talk about how to use the keyframes tool in Fusion to make things appear and disappear at certain times. So let's jump right in. I already have my footage in Resolve. Specifically, I'm going to be using this footage of a spine, a neck, let me hide that, a neck, another graphic of a spine, my green screen footage, and my background plate that I'm going to be using. I'm going to go ahead and show them all, and then I'm just going to select them all and create a new Fusion clip. Whoops, not what I wanted. Select them all, we'll talk about that later. Create a new Fusion clip, jump over into the Fusion tab, and everything shows up right away. Now, one of the first things I recommend doing is separating out your media in nodes, right-clicking on them. You can select them all, right-click and say show tile pictures. There it is. And now we can see our media. Very quickly, one thing I want to talk about, I'm going to start by working on just my green screen footage. I'm going to break that node, I'm going to break that connection, and take my green screen, my merge is going to be just for my green screen, piping that into my media out so I can see that. Let me adjust this window a little bit, that's a little better. Quick note on these merges. I have my background plate that I'm going to be using, I have my green screen plate. They're both going into this merge, and physically, in terms of where they are in the flow, it doesn't really matter which one is up and up, which one is above or below, because remember, it doesn't stack the way things do in After Effects. What does matter is where they pipe into the merge. In this case, my green screen plate, which is this guy, my viewer 1, it's actually going into my foreground for my merge, which is where I want it. And my plate here, which is going to be my background, that's actually going into my background input for my merge node. Now, just for my peace of mind, I am going to move those around because I just like it better when I can see it that way. And I'm going to very quickly go into I'm going to select my green screen plate, and I'm going to add in an ultra keyer. Now, by itself, that doesn't actually do anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my media output on my viewer 1. I'm going to put my media input on viewer 2. That just makes it a little easier to select the green. I'm going to select my ultra keyer, take my eyedropper, drag it over onto the green, and you see immediately in my media out, it starts to hide stuff. It's not perfect. We're going to get into that. My background isn't quite big enough, and I have a bit of a light showing over here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add a polygon. Shift spacebar. I'm going to add a polygon tool. This is going to be a mask for my keyer, so I want to make sure I pipe that into my ultra keyer as a garbage matte. And from there, what I can do is I can very quickly and easily just draw a little mask around myself on my green, connect it back to the start, and that's not quite what I want, because what I need to do is I need to go into my mask and I need to invert it. Now it's better. I still see this black bar below me, but I'm going to fix that here in just a second. But I have my input for my green screen going into my ultra keyer. My polygon mask isn't perfect. You can see that there's some a little bit left behind in my green screen because the green screen isn't lit incredibly well. But if I go into my ultra keyer and change some of my background correction a little bit, I'm super impressed with the ultra keyer in Blackmagic Resolve and Fusion because it's pretty much gone right there, and it's not a one-click key, and I'm sure there's ways I could even make this better, but for my purposes now, it's going to be fantastic. Now I have this little black bar left behind because this was actually shot in DCI 4K, which is a little bigger than Ultra HD, and I'm on the version of Resolve that only does Ultra HD, which is not quite as wide as full 4K DCI. That's resolutions. We don't have to worry about that if you don't need it. What you need to know is there's a little black bar right here. And what I need to do is shift my footage down. To do that, I'm going to add a transform control. And we're going to be using a lot of transform controls. I'm going to take my Ultra Keyer output, put that into my transform control, take my transform control, pipe that into the foreground of my merge, and in transform controls, this is where in After Effects, when you go into layer properties, these are the properties that you find on, a lot of the properties that you find on the Layers tab. For example, I can make sure my media, I'm going to put my media out in 2 because that just makes me feel better. I'm going to put my Ultra Keyer in 1. But I can take my transform control, select that over in my inspector. I could actually make things bigger and smaller. That's not really what I want to do. What I actually really want to do is take my, oops, not that, Y-axis and move it down just a touch. Now you can do it that way, the way I just did it, or you notice there's on-screen controls right here. You can't actually move it up and down just using the screen controls. And I'm just going to go until that black bar is out of the frame. And I'm going to move it a little bit to the right, because that balances out the image a little better. Not quite that far. About right there. And I'm pretty happy with that. So now what we have is a background that doesn't quite fill our frame, and I don't want that. The way you fix that is just adding another transform control. So I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar, add another transform control. It's not where I want it, so I'm going to break these guys, pipe my transform back into my merge, and where I want this transform is actually going into my background plate here. So I'm going to put it between here, pipe my background plate into my transform, pipe my transform into my merge, and there it is. Now I can take my merge, which is tied just to the background plate. Excuse me, I can take the transform tied to the background plate and size it up a little bit, not that much. Size it up a little bit until I'm happy with how it looks. And from there I can bring the Y down some, probably not quite that much. Bring the X across a little bit because I want it a little more balanced, and I'm pretty happy with that. So, a really quick review on adding in green screen. Now I'm going to take my first item that I'm adding, which in this case is this graphic right here. It's already piping into a merge, and it's piping in as the foreground. That's really not what I want. Oh, yeah, it is. I want this as my foreground compared to my green screen information as my background. I could clean this up and make it look a little neater. I'm not super worried about that right now, but just so you know, some people are OCD. I'm not really OCD, I'm OCS a little bit, but that's a whole other subject. But what I'm going to do, I want this to be my foreground. I'm going to pipe in the output of my green screen merge, which is this guy, into the background of this merge. I'm going to take that merge and pipe it into my output, and you're going to see a gigantic graphic. Obviously not what we want. We want to use that transform control to make this guy smaller, because currently it's just filling the entire frame. So if I select my Media 3 in, which is this graphic, hit Command Spacebar and add a transform control, I can then instantly, when you select the graphic and add the node, it automatically pipes it in wherever it's connected. But I can select my transform control, take my size down some, and I can see that it's pretty much right where I want it to be. Now, I don't like these black bars, and you would think to crop it, but I didn't find cropping worked exactly the way I wanted it to in Fusion. So instead, a better tool that I found is the rectangle mask tool. Had a little bit of weirdness with some performance issues in Resolve. I needed to restart. Now, what I'm trying to do is take this clip right here, which is this graphic, and I'm going to cut out these side kind of pillar boxes because I don't need those. And what I'm going to do to accomplish that is to use a rectangle tool. Now, since this is something I'm actually going to try and do to my source, I'm going to actually pipe that rectangle mask right into my source tool. And from there, I can use my inspector, change the width, change the height, until I'm happy with where it is. And now I can use my transform controls to move this guy where I want it. And in the course of a talk, you might notice people, instructional videos, whatnot, they often have graphics included. This is how you do that. So I'm probably going to speed this up really fast because I'm going to add 2 more of these to get to talking about keyframes. So bear with me just a minute while I add 2 more of these graphics in here. Now they're already in Fusion, they're already sitting over here. You can see one is the neck spine, one is the spine. So I'm going to add those really quick and get right back to you. So I'm going to speed this up so you can see it really fast. Now we're back, and I want to very quickly talk about, I have 3 different graphics I want to show up over the course of this video. Now, obviously, as it stands right now, they're all showing up at the same time. You can see them stacked on top of each other, and that's not what we want. So how do we get things to move in and out of Fusion over time? To do that, we're going to use what's called the keyframe editor. Up here I'm going to select keyframes, and you will suddenly see a stack of layers very similar to what you see in After Effects. Difference being, the order of the media and the nodes in the keyframe editor has nothing to do with how they put together. It has nothing to do with how things flow together. What it has to deal with is how things come in and out of your Fusion clip. So if I select any item in my flow, you'll see it highlighted in my keyframe editor. I can select my different transforms, I can select my media ins, I can select my merges, I can select my media out. All of these are here in my keyframe editor. What I'm going to be using the keyframe editor to do is change when these different clips show up in my Fusion clip. So let's start with this graphic right here. It's the top one in my media out. When I select it, it's media in 3. I could change the name, we're going to talk about that later on, but for the moment I'm just going to leave it Media 3. And you see that Media 3 appears the entire length of my Fusion clip. Now, this is pretty much as straightforward as you can be. I'm about 15, 16 frames in. All I need to do is grab one of these sides and I can bring it in. And if I bring it in too far, suddenly it goes away, because now it is not where my playhead is, so I'm not going to actually be seeing it in my clip until the playhead hits it. And I can move my playhead right here, or I can move it around up here in my timeline, and it does pretty much the same thing. So I'm going to leave that right there. Something I have noticed about this, it actually gives you the frame count, which is kind of cool. But I'm going to shorten this up, and I can see exactly how long the duration is in my clip. And if I play through my clip right here, you can see in my primary viewer here, which is my media out viewer, it doesn't appear. As I play through the clip, I'm actually scrubbing through it because playing through it is not real time at the moment, because I have a lot going on in my computer. And then when I get past it, it goes away. One thing I have I really like that Fusion does is it actually lists the exact frame count of your in and your out. For example, this starts 29 frames in and it ends at 91 frames out. That's really nice, and I know the exact frame count of my entire composition is 298 frames, if you need that, but you can get very frame specific here. One thing you might have noticed, two things adjusted when I adjusted my media. My media in and the transform both adjusted at the same time, because that transform is only being affected by the media in, so that's why they only showed up at the same time. Now it's a simple matter of doing the exact same thing. I select my media 4, which is this guy. I can change... Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is change its position. I want to move it up some, kind of in that same position the previous graphic was. But from here, I select my media 4. I shorten it. And I can actually drag this entire thing around, and even then it changes the frame count, which is, I think that's such a nice feature. Really easy to get very precise frame counts, as opposed to, in my opinion, counting the individual frames in After Effects. You can do it that way. I just was never a fan of doing it that way. To me, that always seemed rather tedious. The size is good. On my third media clip, this spine, what I am going to do is I'm going to select my transform and scoot that up. There's an arrow there, so I can do that. Kind of hard to see against the red background, but it is there. Now I see down here my media 5, I select that. I can shorten this guy. So now, when I play through my timeline, I'll just use the timeline to jump around right here. I have 1 graphic, I have 2 graphic, I have 3 graphic. Now, if I play this as it is, they just pop into existence. They just appear out of nowhere. I personally kind of like a fade on that. That's just a personal preference. And the easiest way that I found to add that fade in is actually using this rectangle tool. When I select my rectangle tool, I'm going to move this to the front of my clip right here. I can go to my rectangle tool and I have this one option in my inspector called levels. When you see this little dot right here, that lets you add a keyframe. So I'm going to add a keyframe. I'm going to bring my level down to 0. I'm going to go 5 frames in and bring my level up to 100. And what that does is it actually basically affects the opacity of that clip, of what's inside of that mask, which in this case is the media clip. So it's going to fade in. If I go to the end right here, what I can do again, find that last frame. Oh, too far. Find that last frame, take my level back down to 0. And you can see, this is the other nice thing about the keyframe editor, you can actually see your keyframes down here. It specifically shows you the exact keyframes. Now that's probably where the real power of the keyframe editor is. That's something that I'm still learning right now. But you can see it changing the levels even as I go across. But I can change that up to 1, and you saw the keyframe line change, so that I go from full level over 5 frames down to nothing, and then the media ends. And I can do the exact same thing using the transform for all, using the rectangle mask for all of these guys. Let me do that really fast. And you can see the keyframe editor change as I add in these different effects. A second, let's take you down to 0. And now all of my images that I'm adding have this little animation into it. Again, really cool little thing you can do. We reviewed green screen. We talked about using transform controls to change the location and size of different graphics. Remember, you can use the inspector and the transform control to change the size and the location. You can also use the on-screen controls to affect them when you have the transform selected. And then you use keyframes to change the duration of a clip inside of Resolve. Just a reminder, the keyframe clips looks like layers. They really aren't. They're really just listing duration. They have nothing to do with what's on top of each other. It doesn't really matter in terms of Fusion versus After Effects. In After Effects, everything is layer-based. You're looking at the layers from top to bottom. In Fusion, the keyframe editor only tells you duration. It's a really cool little trick. Hopefully this didn't take very long. This is Michael. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you on YouTube.